This podcast is brought to you by PLI, the Practicing Law Institute. PLI is committed to keeping you ever current on topics that matter to you, like artificial intelligence. Learn more at pli.edu/AIPod.
Welcome to AI and Data Law, part of the PLI Evercurrent podcast. I'm William Tanenbaum, host of the podcast and head of AI and data practice at Moses & Singer in New York. In this series, we bring you the latest perspectives on AI and data through timely talks with thought leaders working at the intersection of AI, data, and the law. In this episode, our guest is Ameen Haddad, Vice President and Associate General Counsel at Oracle America. Our topic is how corporate law departments can use AI. So I'm a sailor. I see a sailboat in your background.
Yeah. I try to mix it up between sailboats on the one hand and actually picturing, I believe that's Newport, Rhode Island, which is one of my family's favorite spots during the summer, at least, and hopefully a retirement spot some years down the road.
Well, it's just great to see you over a podcast. You and I met at a speech in California, I don't know how many years ago, but I remember we were speaking on some tech subject together. And it's been really great to stay in touch during all those years. And we've all kind of moved around a little bit in that time period. So I think it'd be pretty good. I know you have a senior role at Oracle. And if you can kind of start at Bowdoin and work your way forward, giving us the highlights of how you ended up here and what you're doing, and especially as the AI functions and the data functions roll up to what you supervise and what you do.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for having me today, Bill. I'll start back where I began, and that was I grew up in Massachusetts, Boston born and bred. Ended up going to college, as you mentioned, at Bowdoin College in Brunswick, Maine. There I was government and environmental studies. Environmental studies was a brand new vocation back in that time that we were all getting ramped up in. And years later, unfortunately, still seems like we have a ways to go in a lot of respects, much like technology, cloud, and AI. But I went from Bowdoin and paralegaled at a little law firm called Cravath, Swaine & Moore in New York for 2 years. And learned a couple of things that I really was interested in law and love law, and that also I probably didn't want to be a litigator at the end of the day because it was a different experience than I saw on the TV courtrooms. I went to law school at BU Law, and then graduated and joined Skadden Arps as an M&A attorney, where I lived. I practiced before and through and past the end of the .com era, watching it go up and down the cycle. And it was a great time to be an M&A attorney because there was so much going on, both with mergers and acquisitions, but just finance, venture capital, all of it was going gangbusters as people tried to commercialize what I'd call the .com phenomena and the internet in general. And I remember many times speaking on the subject matter with folks just wanting to put .com on something that had nothing to do with the internet. And it was something it was a lesson I learned that I've seen many times all the way through, I think now in the world of AI, as this becomes its own marketing campaign. But I went from Skadden and joined Oracle in and around 2003, where I've been since, but I've served different roles there. Actually, I take that back. I've maintained the same role. I've just added more things. And so I joined as a commercial attorney doing what was then really on-premise contracts, helping out, figure out templates. And it just expanded from there. As Oracle acquired companies, I acquired skills, be it from hardware when we acquired Sun to different types of on-premise applications to eventually cloud to data services, ad tech. And now we are venturing into a brand new world of AI enhanced tools. But I also, along the way, as I developed all these expertise and consulted with senior management and senior members of the legal team, grew a passion for knowledge management. and we could have a whole podcast on my views on that. And actually, have just contributed to a chapter in a book for PLI on knowledge management and innovation that's coming out in about a month. So I, recommend.
Yeah, what's the title of the book?
Knowledge management and innovation. It's okay. A very creative title, but I think it will be updated on a fairly annual basis as that field continues to evolve. And it looks at it from a legal aspect, of course, being a PLI book. And my contribution really was as one of the handful of attorneys from the in-house world doing knowledge management. Most of them were law firm. And I will say, I'll just summarize it in that I think lawyers in-house are the knowledge custodians for their companies. And that's what we're the legal knowledge custodians. And so in that fashion, everybody in a legal department are a knowledge management professional. So I think it's extremely important. And when we get to AI, it becomes even more important, because as we've learned in these nascent days of this technology and as it evolves, generative AI, large language models, it really goes to data. It is about the data. And guess what? Good data gets better results. And what does a knowledge management professional do but curate data, make sure data is trustworthy, make sure we know where it comes from, make sure the results are what we expected. So I think there's a huge role and intersection between the knowledge management professional and what we'll get from AI. And so at Oracle, I oversee a global team that handles knowledge management training, but I also function as a cloud subject matter expert, and data is just sort of a part of that in what I do. Been looking into AI technologies in recent months, really in two ways, both as it impacts our products and services, but I'll put that one on the side and say how it impacts our own function as a legal department. We're a law firm onto our own here at Oracle, and AI has a very, very positive impact, I think, ability to impact how we deliver our services, how we can improve the quality of our services to our internal and external clients. But there's also, as with any new technology, a lot of bumps in the road ahead. And so I've been trying with my team to get ahead of that, to look how these technologies could be applied to our legal services. And there's many different use cases we could talk about, and see what are going to be the best in breed. See, we are a technology company, see where we can internally address some of these solutions and where third parties may be better suited to present the solution. And right now it's really a learning phase. I mean, it is a great time to be creative, because that's what this tool will enable, I think, if used correctly, for us as lawyers, again, to be creative in a way we never expected by using a tool that augments us, if you will. It's a superpower when used correctly. And I really believe that. I think it is, again, a little bit at the nascent stage. And I see a lot of people tagging AI on the things that really aren't AI, just like in the .com days, just like in the early cloud days.
No, I agree with you on that. I remember, I think I was about 7 during the .com age. And I remember that all of a sudden, all these companies became .com companies. I also remember the other side. I remember someone telling me that no one would ever buy a book on the internet.
Yeah.
And, I don't know whether I was more amazed with the statement, because what would be the easiest thing to buy on the internet, right?
Oh, yeah.
And the other thing is the thought that you were entitled to have that opinion.
Yeah.
How did you know enough to know? And I think we see a lot of that in AI. A lot of people just have jumped into it. They don't know what it is, but it's topical, it's fun, and people are just rushing a little too fast. But I do want to circle back, because I thought the point you made earlier was of tremendous importance, that you can't do AI without good data, and you actually can't do data without good data.
Yeah.
I think that's a real foundational thing. I mean, people talk about large language models, and what they're really talking about, the fact is their data integrity, structured or unstructured. Is it curated? Do you know what's there? So I don't think it's possible, and I want to get your views on this. I don't think you can really seriously talk about good AI without having the data component to it, because you can't do AI without data. And if you're going to use data, it's going to be something you need to use AI with. So I think almost a foundational principle for this disruptive technology, that we can debate whether data is a technology or not, but for the sake of argument, you have two technologies that are, very much intertwined. And I think your role is making sure that the data folks in your organization and the internal and external AI people that you're working with are doing it in some kind of integrated basis with a big feedback loop to make sure that everybody is really kind of enhancing where you're trying to go. So I'll stop for a second, see if there's any comments that resonate with you. And
all over the place, really. So AI has been with us for many years. I mean, it's not a new technology in it itself. And, I will say the decision tree AI, rule-based AI, where it's yes and no, and I think the words they use are a supervised trained model, where
right.
humans give, if this, then that, and it's an algorithm that just follows that. That's been very useful in legal tools and frankly, just general tools for a long time. Generative AI, large language models that actually are unsupervised for the most part, in where they're trained against a foundational set of information like the internet. The potential is amazing to what they can do in downstream solutions. But also you start with a very unreliable set of data in the internet. And we all know, we all browse, we all see the results that come out when you do a search on your favorite browser. Imagine now a machine being taught to respond based on that foundational quagmire of information, of unstructured information. I'll use another word. So, as we look at that, we then have to figure out how as lawyers, where we're paid for accuracy, we're paid for concise results that are, provable, and how do we do that in a world where we have a tool that is starting with a foundational model that is inherently filled with unreliable information? And I think that's where you're starting to see now a shift into different kinds of models, the RAG model, where you ground your foundational basis of a large language model in something that's more targeted. Again, make it a bit supervised by saying, look here, okay, you've learned this wonderful world of the general internet. Now look here for the specific information I want you to learn. Maybe that's a treatise on law, or maybe it's a contracting standard, and apply that to the question I'm posing to you. That I find to be the most exciting aspect of how this technology is evolving, is not how it's used by itself, but how we could curate it through augmentation, again, through supplementing it, through things that will ground it in a reality that actually will work for us to deliver better services.
Yeah, so let's dive into RAG for a second. First we'll have to explain the acronym because we have to. And by the way, do you know what my favorite 3-letter acronym is?
As long as you're not saying 4-letter acronyms, I suppose.
My favorite 3-letter acronym is TLA, which stands for 3-letter acronym. And you have to have an acronym about an acronym.
You have to have an acronym.
But let's dive into RAG. And then we have the other question about, what the foundational model is, what the large language model is, and whether, RAG solves the problem of a unstructured model.
Yeah.
So I'll let you start with RAG and then kind of segue into the unstructured stuff. I have my doubts that it really solves everything, but let's hear what you have to say.
No, and it doesn't. So it stands for retrieval-augmented generation. I think that's, and it's a framework, as I think of it, that again allows you to ground using other knowledge a large language model, which is generative AI, which all generative AI starts with some kind of foundational set of information, usually off the internet. But it's trying to ground that in a reality, so the results downstream will be more predictable, avoid certain problems we've seen with these large language models, such as AI hallucinations, which are unexpected results or results even worse, what they use the word toxic, because when it's just, again, looking at a large set of data that is unreliable, like the internet, or that has unreliable aspects to it or uncertain aspects to it, you can get all sorts of results. When you use a RAG framework, you're saying, again, here's the huge part, the internet, of the foundational information. Let's now ground what the results are from that on a narrower set of information. Again, we're introducing a set of supervised, curated information, hopefully, that can direct the results to be more what you expect. And a great example is my eighth grader had an algebra test, and at the end of it, her teacher said, "Okay, let's go give the question to our favorite generative AI, ChatGPT, the free version, I assume." And they put it in there, and it couldn't figure out the algebra problem. It was a pictorial algebra problem with multiple variables. And the reason was more around the fact that it wasn't trained to think like an eighth grader and respond in the way that an eighth grader would pictorially, visually represent that. So they weren't getting the result expected. But there was another tool that they used that had been trained against also eighth grade algebra math book, essentially. And that provided the right answer because it took that, grounded the foundational model in a set of information, eighth grade math, and then it was able to answer it in the expected way. So, it's these interesting things that I think show us that these AI solutions react to what questions we pose to them, and then what data we give them. And if you just give them a very broad set of data and a broad question, you're going to get all sorts of unexpected information, which again, bringing it back to how legal will use this, that's not a really acceptable way for lawyers to provide guidance. If we're saying, well, this might be true, this might not be, that's not what our clients want to hear, nor is it a kind of tool that we want to be using. And
I'd be delighted not to give somebody an answer like that.
Yeah. But that's where I think, again, the RAGS framework will have benefits. And again, it doesn't eliminate the risk because it's still applying information in ways that, may not be expected at the end of the day. It is narrowing what it's focusing it, if you will, on a certain set of information that you think is more reliable, but it doesn't necessarily result in the same answer that you would have hoped for it to get. It's just a better chance of it, I think, at least from what I've seen so far.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's applying to a set of data where 6 months from now, we're going to have different sets of data with different problems with non-RAG solutions. But let's just, I want to kind of turn back to what you said and what you do, which is, knowledge-based use of AI, for Oracle, and generalize that, for any real serious enterprise with, internal legal departments that are doing certainly non-trivial legal work. So I agree. We've all been doing knowledge management in our own way, whether it's through iManage or some other kind of technology. Right. But here we are with some real powerful stuff. So let's start at this point. What are your goals right now? Because I think when people say, we're going to use AI as a strategy, AI is not a strategy. A strategy is strategic objectives. AI is a tool to get to the strategy. And I think that's something that everybody needs to keep in mind. So taking a step back from how AI is a tool, how do large companies, how do enterprises want to use it, in the context of a corporate law department?
Right. Well, one of the first things I've been doing is gathering use cases from my colleagues, just, brainstorming what could you think an AI enhanced tool, what do you think it could do for your practice area? And it really ranges depending on what their practice area is. In litigation, I think litigation in some ways, e-discovery aspects have been inclusive of AI enhanced tools for quite some time. They're a great way of looking at unstructured data and finding some structure to it, to mine it for the information that you're trying to find in response to some piece of litigation. So that's already been an area that I think for a while has had AI, whether it's generative AI. I think that may not be the case, but it's already been utilizing that with pretty good results for what is a very labor intensive process. I again, going back in time, remember sitting in a a war room with boxes and boxes and boxes of information and mountains of documents sitting there that a first year, second year, or third year, or whoever had to just sift through, catalog, index, and then put a report together and summarize. And these tools can help expedite that, in different stages. Sometimes it's just putting the data from an unstructured basis into some kind of format that can be indexed and searched. I think with generative AI, it takes it to the next step, that not only can it help do that, it then can help summarize it into the report that you ultimately are going to be giving to your client to explain what you may need to produce or what risks are there. So that's one area that litigation and discussing, what could be the next step. I think, again, we've been using e-billing and e-discovery, and I say we as a legal industry in-house have been doing that for quite some time. The next step, again, is having it actually take that and summarize and write it. I've seen demonstrations of tools from large legal practice firms, I'll put it that way, firms that help us find case law. And I don't want to attribute names, and they're all coming out with tools that will help automate drafting of briefs by you telling them what is the position I'm trying to make. It will go out to, again, using a large language model, but then augmented with specific case law data, again, in a RAG sort of fashion, to find an answer that you can then insert, or it will insert in your style of writing into your brief. Phenomenal, very exciting. Again, it raises a lot of questions, though, as a lawyer. The first thing that being is like, okay, the result that it's doing here, how do I check to make sure it is accurate? And that's where we start getting into other AI concepts that you start hearing about: responsible AI, ethical AI also, and is it practicing law without ever going to a bar, notwithstanding that I know ChatGPT, I think, passed a bar in some incredible amount of time with some incredible score, but it's still, it raises a bunch of these questions. And transparency, which I think is a little bit, it's related to responsible AI and being able to interpret the results and understand where they're coming from. But those are the things that I start raising in my mind when I look at these tools. How do I not only know what is the data that they start with, and is it trustworthy, the curated data of some sort, at least to ground the foundational data, but then the result, how do I check that against another resource that I know is trustworthy to make sure the result is what I expected? And again, that could be done. Maybe it gives you sources, references as it puts out its results, says, this is how I came up with my answer. And that allows you to go check it. But that's one example in litigation. I'll give you another area that is important to me, I think, because there's a lot that can be done. And it's this commercial drafting of contracts. Most enterprise companies have hundreds, if not thousands, of contracts they've done in their lifespan for their customers, for their suppliers, and they've taken many different positions among them. And deriving from that best practices is what a knowledge management professional in a law department spends their time doing. They create templates, they create options, but they, if a call could be reduced to an option, then you don't need the lawyer. What the lawyer enters is bespoke. So how do you guide the lawyer who's coming into the company to think in a bespoke situation in a fashion that follows your company's risk tolerances, your company's operational abilities, and the law to apply this existing experience and knowledge to a new situation, to the bespoke situation? And that's go ahead.
So that's the use case, I guess, for training lawyers in a certain way, right? That's right. AI to turn a first-year associate into a third-year associate. In some ways, with the difference being in an enterprise, you have not several, but a clear business focus that the young lawyer has to know the risk parameters, the objectives, all the company-specific things about the work product. Right. So has that worked well? I mean, has there been traction in using AI for, intellectually onboarding somebody?
Well, it's a good question. One of the first things you do in a knowledge management program that's an enterprise-based knowledge management program, is attack the search part. How do you mine your information? And a search engine is the easiest way. We all use them in different ways. And it's just one that is aimed at your internal information, repositories of contracts, repositories of memos, white papers, and being able to quickly find information within that group of data. And a smart search engine, in historical words, is something that can do keyword searches, Boolean searches. A bit more advanced is maybe a proximity search where it's this word within that much of that word or that phrase. And then you could do fuzzy searches where it will take up this word and it knows it all service could become servicing or services, and those are all acceptable results. Then you get even smarter and you start being able to ask it questions in a natural way, like I would ask you and say, do you know something that supports this proposition? And it may not be exact words that it is then looking for. It's looking for concepts. And again, lawyers are paid to be bespoke. They're paid to address the unknown. So it has to be able to take what you're asking and translate that into a concept and find like concepts within your history of executed information, contracts, white papers, what again you have. So that's where we start looking at, again, AI taking that smart search to the next step and helping us augment the search, textualize it in a way that allows us to pull information from our existing database in a way we couldn't before.
Is this in the case when you're looking at your, let's call it your own database of agreements? Is that what you're talking about?
That's what I'm talking about, mining your own information, which while you might think, well, that's a trustworthy set of information. It raises another issue, and this is the one that I've grappled with internally. Every company has done contracts which they hold their nose to, and they put it in the bottom of the drawer, and they hope it never comes back. So if you're mining a set of information of contracts, let's say in this instance, that includes that one on the bottom drawer, I also don't want the tool pulling that because it meets some query from a first year or a new member of our company's legal department and saying, this meets the proposition here, use this. I want it to be able to do that if it does that with context and say, do this, but you know what? It had a lot of problems. And that's what we spend as knowledge management professionals in the legal department a lot of time doing is putting comments and notes against the work we did to say, we did this, but we didn't like it. And it could have been better this way, that way. It raised these risks so that when I apply the concept again to the next deal, I'm not just repeating what was a bad precedent. I'm learning from it and saying, how could it be better? An AI search engine enhanced tool like that, I don't know if it yet does that. I've played around with some and they're very good at finding the bottom drawer contract, but they're not good at telling me, is it good or bad based on my, again, company's operational history, its risk tolerances, all of that.
Yeah, I have the same thing. I mean, we do a lot of agreements. We have a tech company, right? So we have multiple clients. We have similar industries. We have similar tech. So the agreements are similar, and they're also specific for the company's objectives, for the type of third party it hired to do it. So there's commonality, but important differences. So what we do is we take out different sections. We kind of mine each agreement and then have a collection of license grants. Then we have licensor grants. Then we have licensee grants.
Yeah.
Then we come to the problem that you've said, that at the end of the day, to get a deal done, you'll have done, not the perfect way you wanted to do the provision, but you did it because it wasn't core to the deal and you could kind of live with something because it wasn't crucial.
Yeah.
But that means you don't want to have that become your standard model, right? So that's the challenge. So we kind of annotated that said, these were the circumstances, or, be very cautious, go talk to somebody before you use this. I'll give you a very wacko example because you're from Boston and this happened in Boston. I was doing a deal representing a vendor, and the lawyer was a Boston lawyer. But the problem we've all run into, he wasn't a tech lawyer. And sometimes it's much harder to do a tech deal with a lawyer who's not a tech lawyer. And he was saying, I absolutely have to have representations and warranties. And I said, okay. And he goes, I need a rep that there will be no bugs in the software and that the internet will not go down. And I told to him and I said, there will be a bug in the software. Your question is whether there will be a bug in this material and whether it could be fixed, not whether it exists. And I don't know who you think runs the internet, but it's not us. So I can't do that. So this went around and around and around. And finally he said, we're not going to get any place until I have the rep and warranty that I asked you about. And so then I said, okay, I will represent and warrant that the internet will go down and that there will be a bug in the software. And his reaction was, thank you. So first of all, my client goes, I'm not promising that there's going to be a bug in the software. And I'm saying, just promise, because if there isn't, you're not hurt. You haven't breached anything.
Yep.
And second of all, you're off the case on the internet thing. You already promised it wouldn't work. So my point is, somewhere someone is going to find that agreement and they're going to read this provision and they're going to want to know, how did anyone write a provision like that? And the answer is, we're not really sure either, but it didn't hurt us, so it went in the contract. So what I guess I'm saying is, we handle that with something that's not self-evidently strange by just annotating it. But it would be really good to see if there were a use case that could help us have not only provisions of agreement, but context. Because I think your data doesn't mean anything unless you have the context for it. If you say it's 50 degrees outside, that doesn't tell you much. If it's 50 degrees in Hawaii, it's cold. If it's 50 degrees in Maine, it's warm. So you need to have a context for that data. So let me kind of swivel back a little bit. What are like the 3 use cases you're looking at right now for your law department that you think would apply to a lot of other large enterprises?
Well, we mentioned the one, a smart search, but a search that, again, we use with a bit of caution, just because, again, it could pull that bottom drawer contract. The other use case that I think poses a lot of interest and would be generally interesting, like a lot of enterprise companies, we acquire other companies and they have their own grouping of contracts, and reading them to understand what you're acquiring. And there's the diligence side when you're acquiring them, but once you've acquired, ingesting and understanding what have their risk tolerances been, what have their provisions been. That's where I think, again, AI could summarize very quickly contracts, not necessarily giving, because I think, again, this is a challenge for AI, an opinion, whether that's good or bad for you, because it really is dependent on your risk tolerances and your business operations, which it may not know. But it could at least summarize the contracts based against some standard that you've trained it, some contracting standard, Corbin's on contracts, and tell it, these are things that stand out to me as beyond general risk tolerances based on that standard.
Do you think it could divine at some level kind of a set of parameters as to what the risk tolerances are? Is it possible to get a use case that would do that?
I think it can. I mean, again, you can train it against other things. As we said in the RAGS model, you could put playbooks in there that have your best practices. You could have, again, specific contracting standards. Now it's not just all contracts, but cloud contracts. You could go to NIST or some standard like that and say that. You could go, if you're looking at, control reports, to stock standards and upload those and tell it to follow those, and anything that doesn't comply with it. You could give it parameters that could help it discern better what is good and bad. And certainly that could include specific information to your company. And I think that's where this all goes down, is that you train it, and through feedback, train it more. These things often have an ability to say, was this helpful? And no, it wasn't. And then why? And train it through that result. And it knows next time how better to respond. So I do think that's a possibility. But I think that the technology is still evolving. I'll give you another example. One of the things I've looked at is what constitutes a contract. When it's reviewing a contract and determines what's in it. Many contracts include links to other contracts, and many vendors or customers for that matter may include in a link certain very important information for one good reason or another. And that is something that I've seen a lot of AI struggle with, that they'll look at the contract and says, well, this contract's deficient because it doesn't have any SLAs. Well, that's because the SLAs are contained on an online document that is consistently being updated and improved. And unless I told the AI, this is all one contract, it didn't understand that. So it marked it as a deficiency where it really wasn't. It actually had outstanding SLAs. It was just contained in a separate document. It didn't associate. Another thing is defined terms. Defined terms, as we lawyers know, mean a lot. A capitalized agreement and a lowercase agreement are not the same thing. And a lot of the generative AI tools I've seen so far that are amazing in that they can suggest language. But guess what? They often suggested irrespective of the defined term. And it's something that humans know to look at and then read wherever those definitions lie, again, which may be a separate document, and pull the thread through. But I think, AI is learning. I'm not saying that it will not get there. I think it will. It's just, these are the things you need. And as I evaluate these tools for our own use, I want to know their weaknesses so that if we deploy them, we can put to our users, the lawyers, this is what you need to be aware of in limitations and what you need to watch out for in perhaps results that are unexpected. That's another way of mitigating some of these things we've talked about, the AI hallucinations. Hopefully, again, our users as lawyers are also sensitive to the toxicity, be it the biases that may come out if you've trained it against information that is dated. And by the way, that's the other problem with the foundational models. They can be scraping their foundation, and it's usually as of some date. I asked ChatGPT the other day to give me a summary of the recent AI executive order, and I was using just the free version on my personal device, and I got back a statement saying, I can't do that because I was only trained up till January, I think, of 2022. And so this is beyond my knowledge. Go check somewhere else. And that's where, again, if you have a RAGS model, maybe that's where you supplement it with more recent information. That's another way you can use that to update the foundational model. But it's a limitation to be aware of. Just because it said it didn't exist in its repository doesn't mean it doesn't exist and have real repercussions, and you need to be aware of it. And I would hate to have based my results on that. So that's it.
I'm going to take a sidestep. I think that executive order is going to have a number of implications. I mean, obviously, it's to the federal government, it's to different agencies with a lot of directives to different agencies to do task force to accomplish certain things, including the PTO and the Copyright Office to give some thought to what human intervention will make inventions still inventions that are not purely done by natural persons. But what seems to me would be interesting, just to jump through follow me as you jump through my hoops here.
Please.
So, executive order says, okay, you agencies go out and develop some stuff because we have to have, trustworthy, reliable, ethical AI with security and all kinds of provisions. And how is that going to be done in practice? Agencies are going to hire private sector vendors to do the tech, right? So there's a big opportunity for vendors to start doing work for the government in AI. Then I think it would be interesting, and here I'm speculating, so I'd like your thoughts, but at the end of the day, you're going to have government contracts, where the government's on one side and a whole series of third-party vendors are on the other side. Now, I'm assuming that to some degree, those are going to be publicly available documents because the government's involved until you hit the point where it's nuclear secrets or something that you have to store in Florida. And that now you have a searchable database. And if I'm right, there's going to be some very interesting ways to kind of divine best practices or at least uses of technology, because now you're looking at a whole bunch of pretty advanced projects with pretty talented lawyers on both sides. So that's what I think one of the aspects, in a couple of years will be from this executive order. So now that I've ambushed with you with that, got any thoughts on that? And
other than I agree, I think that is, the solution that not solution, I agree in the sense that I think this order will do, one of its purposes is to inspire creative uses of AI technology, and it states that it's not only a set of rules and warnings and restrictions. I think it's also has a goal of using this technology, of encouraging use in the right ways, and with the individuals now focused on it, either to try to comply with what will be put out standards by the organizations that it's mandated. In the next few months, we'll see what those require, but you'll have a whole grouping of lawyers, both on the government side and on the commercial sides, that interact with the government, working to meet these standards and ensure they're in place. That will bring new knowledge and people with experiences in refining how they use AI and the way they, put boundaries around it, and the way that we make sure the results are what we expect. All of those good things, I think that will all benefit from having an executive order that inspires us both to use the technology for innovation, but also put in protections in AI governance and become more familiar with it through that process. Through checking, through testing, that's the way anything gets better. My car gets better through an annual checkup. So I think an AI tool will benefit the same way from having checks and balances around it, and people using a strong AI governance program to ensure that if their use of AI complies with the standards that are going to be evolving themselves, I'm sure, over time.
Yeah, I was trying to take it, in my mind, what I was thinking about was at the end result, you're going to have a bunch of contracts that I would love to read personally, because I would like to know what somebody who did some really high class work for the Department of Energy came up with on, I don't know, let's just call it sustainability. I'd like to see those results. And now what I have postulated is the result of all this stuff, the work with third-party commercial vendors and the government, is going to give us a corpus of agreements that are going to be a good learning set. And I'm just going to call it best practices for the sake of this discussion. And it's a corpus that's probably easily searchable. That was my point, that at the end of the day, we're going to have a corpus of agreements with information we would like. So we're going to have, it's not AI created agreements, right? It's AI inspired agreements. How do we do something with AI? Right. Now we know. Now we have a whole bunch of contracts saying how we got to various aspects of the same problem. And as I said, let's assume they're publicly available and you can run what will in a couple of years be some really good tools over it. That's my only point, that, there's going to be a really cool set of documents available, on a very interesting topic.
Yeah, absolutely. To address the standards that come out, the supplemental and supporting documentation that will be necessary, and as you point out, probably public available. I mean, I don't know, even SEC filings that you might have to comply with those by including some of that information in that, who knows? It all will get out there and create a whole new set of information that we then can use another AI tool to summarize and mine as we see fit. So that I think is pretty exciting.
I mean, there are certain states, we both do outsourcing, and there are certain states where outsourcing agreements have to be publicly available under sunshine laws.
Yeah.
So you can go to those states and you can get agreements. And, there's some redaction, but you can pretty much get a good set of agreements. Now, this is really, really manually intensive right now.
Yep.
I have some lawyer who's just amazing at finding out what appendix to what town meeting the agreement was attached to satisfy the open law requirements. So we're doing it manually. They're there. My thought was, wow, if we really get these good documents in one place, A, that's good. B, they're on this topic. That's even better. C, a lot of insights. And D, AI is going to help us kind of find it, and take a while, I think, for the AI to be smarter than I am, but it will find things in a quick way. Anyhow, I've kind of taken you off a path there we haven't discussed this at all in advance, but
you'd asked me also, and I wanted to close out 3 examples that
I was going back there myself. Okay.
So the third example, another commercial example I will give, is comparisons of contract forms. And this is, again, public information. All all vendors, not all vendors, but a lot of vendors of best practices making their standard contracts publicly available. And one of the things we do is benchmark ourselves against not only standards put out by a government or by a industry or nonprofit organization, whatever standard we're measuring, but also against what are other vendors of like products and services doing. And here again, AI can be really beneficial. An AI enhanced tool, a large language model that allows it to compare these, your precedent against their precedent and net out differences very quickly. And again, you can ground it, as we've talked about, against some contracting standard that it measures what terms are good and bad. And I've seen some solutions already out there, third party, that are pretty good at that. At least in doing a first take and saying, gee, your contract compared to their contract seems to have this or that. And this makes it more or less perhaps customer friendly versus vendor friendly, what have you. And I think that's a pretty neat thing, a neat solution for helping us to draft more quickly and optimize the forms that we're using, both to make sure they meet best industry practices by, a live comparison, if you will, an up-to-date comparison, but also just to make sure that we are continuing to refine and improve what we're doing, because otherwise they can, like anything, a contract template can become stale, the way you're addressing issues. And this allows you to quickly see where changes are happening, where industry is going, and where improvements are necessary. Not without problems. Again, as I mentioned, a lot of time AI has problems deciphering where one contract isn't really the entire story, where the contract, again, has URLs or attachments or supplements, or it's a master that has statements of work underneath it. It has trouble sometimes putting that all together as a human would, but they're getting better. And I think, again, they can help us compare and figure out against both industry standard and other vendors of like products and services how we're doing.
Yeah, that's a really intriguing way to do it. I can see why enterprises would want to know where they stand. And I think if they're publicly available, it avoids a lot of antitrust problems, right? Because it's
right. And confidentiality, one of the other concerns, obviously in using any large language model is potentially how it may reuse our information. So if we're using all public information, that solves one of the challenges there.
Is there another use case that comes to mind for operations, legal operations?
Yeah, one of the other things we are always struggling about in a knowledge management world is metrics. That is figuring out how are tools used, what are they used for. And one thing, that a creative suggestion was to use an AI model to take a look at our work product and discern from that, because they can back engineer where did the deliverable derive its information from? Was it from our database?
Right.
And why is that important? Because I can put all of these treatises, templates together, but at the end of the day, it's anecdotal information I get from the attorney. He said, oh, you saved me, I used your template, or you saved me, I used your guidance in this resource or that. But we're hoping that it may allow metric discovery by being able to look at our work product in general and say, this is clearly derived from the resources you've assembled. So there's value in doing more of this versus that. And, we already do this in websites. We can measure people coming to and from our website, what they stop and pull down, what they look at. But now it's taking it another level to the actual how they use it. And so that creates a feedback loop just to us to say more of this is needed, or this was well received because it was actually utilized in a work product. So, these are again, not a solution we have, but an area that we are looking at for possible use of AI.
Are you looking to electronic billing for any use cases?
E-billing with law firms is another area that for sure has, that's actually one of the early adopters of AI tools, not large language models. I'm talking machine learning, rule-based decision tree, more of the basic stuff. Because it really speaks to it. We provide the rules. These are our billing practices, our travel and expense policies. and then it looks at a set of data, your bills submitted by your law firm, the Times, and can quickly say, does that fall into these rules or not? Yes or no? No, it's kicked out into a go talk with them or rejected pile about, this. You stayed, Bill Tanenbaum stayed at a Ritz when we're only paying for a Holiday Inn, Bill. Why did you stay at a Ritz? And he kicked it out.
That Holiday Inn. I got to tell you, it was very hot water. It was great. From the lawyer side, we're looking at them, right? We have to deal with different e-billing systems, but we still have a corpus of data, and we can flip it. I'm not going to talk about all the things we can do in this setting, but let's just say it helps us do estimates, because now we know how much, certain matters, how much time it took and what level of attorney it took. So now that we've basically recorded that, we can go ahead and make, let's call it, tactical use of it. We can just have a more intelligent response to a client who says, how long will this take? How much will it cost?
Yeah.
It's data, right? It's always a data question. But once you put it in an e-billing system, then it's more accessible and more susceptible to queries.
Yeah.
That's a use case that we see on our side. Well, this has been great. I want to give you a chance just to pop out one use case you think would be really cool that's like 3 or 4 years away, that the tech isn't ready for. But
I think the real neat case is something that we're actually probably it's not even 3 or 4 years ago, and that is the use of digital assistants with lawyers. Some of it can be a little scary, but that you're using the digital assistant to ask questions that you would normally ask to a colleague or mentor, and have a legal response, a legal chat with that bot. It will pull, again, at best, it comes back to the data. Hopefully it's trained on curated data so that the response it gives to you is something that is expected and trustworthy, and it gives you the references so you can check it. But why I think that could be very cool as a knowledge management professional, because the other thing about data and information, it's only as good if it's provided timely. One of the big things I learned moving from being in a law firm to in-house, where we're a public company, and if you don't get the contract done by the quarterly target and it flips into another quarter, there's a ramification at the bottom line. And so at times it is about getting the work product that is accurate, but may not be, the Gutenberg Bible of legal, work product that's delivered. It is about getting something that's timely, accurate, and trustworthy to your client within their revenue timetable, their targets. And this is where a digital assistant that's available 24/7 may solve some of those problems, because that's my constant goal, is to give it on demand information when you need it, where you need it. And we can do that through videos. We can do that through treatises. We can do it through a full text search. But I could see an AI eventually doing it through a little friend that you have with you at those wee hours of the night at the end of a quarter, giving you the guidance and the information live as almost a companion or junior associate would in real life these days.
Yeah, I agree. I think the next big phase is really digital assistants, whatever you call them, whether they go attend a Zoom meeting on your behalf or whatever they do. I think it's going to be really interesting. Well, this has been great. I really thank you so much for giving us your time, Ameen, and we'll glad to have you come back, and we'll find out some more use cases as they evolve. So thanks very much.
It's my pleasure.
Thanks for listening to AI and Data Law, part of the PLI Evercurrent podcast. Please note that the views and opinions expressed in this podcast represent those of the host and individuals being interviewed, and not necessarily those of PLI. For more AI-related content from the Practicing Law Institute, visit pli.edu/AIPod.